thank you so much for joining us. This is so fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to catch up finally.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I'm always answering questions about you, but now I get to actually ask you questions, which feels pretty funny. So I guess the first question is, what was your background before Recess?
Yeah, so I didn't come from the consumer packaged good industry or cannabis industry. In fact, I didn't know a single person that worked in either of those when I kind of started working on the idea. But I spent the first 7 years of my career in San Francisco in early stage, kind of two different early stage tech startups. And so kind of was there from 2010 to 2017 and saw that kind of startup culture emerge. And I think I apply somewhat of a Silicon Valley mindset to kind of building a business in these categories.
Definitely, especially with the scale that you're aiming for. It's really impressive. So as we both know, starting a company could be a huge risk. Do you remember the moment that you decided to go all in on Recess?
I do actually. I kind of basically, long story short, about 3 years ago, I saw CBD oil bubbling up on the periphery. And I've always been a naturally kind of wired, hyper stressed out guy and was always looking for various things to help me kind of calm down, reset, rebalance, and started using CBD oil and basically had just a number of insights from the experience. The first being like, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Stress and anxiety is clearly skyrocketing as a result of these kind of transformational times that we're living in. And that basically the theory was that CBD, like the user experience of putting CBD oil under your tongue that tastes like grass is not a great one. But the way to think about CBD is as a compound, no more interesting than caffeine or protein or vitamin C, just ultimately a commoditized functional ingredient that's going to serve as the base alongside other functional ingredients of an emerging category in both food and beverage, supplements, food, like you name it, focused on relaxation. And that, when you think about the history of the consumer packaged goods industry, the big outcomes are when there's like a new platform introduced. So like over the past 20 years, energy drinks, right? And I think recently you have like alt meat and alt dairy, you have, hard seltzer and seltzer. And I think each of these is really like a reflection of something bigger happening in society, right? So the past 20 years was this kind of growth at all costs mentality, globalization, grow, right? Like alt meat, alt dairy is really a reflection of like environmentalism, right? And that these are solutions to kind of, help the planet. I think hard seltzer and seltzer are really about like wellness, having kind of a flavored drink that doesn't have 30 grams of sugar in it, whether that's, alcohol or soda. And I think what CBD and Recess is about is really about kind of dealing with the world around us, right? That is, rapidly changing. And again, the CBD is really a reflection of that. And, I like to say they don't call the energy drink category the caffeine category, they call it the energy category. And I don't think Red Bull and Starbucks and Monster Energy would define themselves as caffeine companies. And so ultimately, I think, CBD is just going to fade to the background. And it's going to be infused into many products and applications, focused on helping people, again, take the edge off, relax, reset, calm down. And I think it's going to be a really, really massive category over the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, especially for those who don't know, we are huge believers in bed and Recess, and we're also investors, and we're very lucky to be that. So I guess my next question goes, in our very first meeting, right? You were the first person who told me what CBD was, and I'd never tried it before I met you. And I don't think that's an isolated case, right? You were very early on it. You hopped on the trend. You did well. How hard was it to get investors to understand like what your picture was and your vision was if they didn't really know what CBD could do?
Yeah. Well, at the time, you also have to realize like there was no like supply chain really. Like there was, you couldn't dissolve, oil doesn't dissolve in water, right? And so I was like, how am I going to get CBD in a drink? And it was literally me calling like farmers in Kentucky and like, how do I like put this in a drink? They like, and the dots connected over the past couple years, like the entire supply chain of the hemp industry, from the cultivation to the extraction to the processing to the emulsion technology is all grown. I think it was how to get investors. It was just like, I think a thesis and a vision that just made sense. I'm like, what is Red Bull? Well, it's caffeine and taurine in a liquid that enables a feeling. And I think one thing I've observed about the CPG industry and the cannabis industry is I think people forget, like, what are these brands? Like, and it's not just the liquid in a can or, just slapping CBD on a label that's going to allow you to build something enduring, which is actually all that really matters. I looked at, Red Bull and Monster and Gatorade, which are like the inspirations, as effectively media companies that monetize through selling cans, right? Red Bull and Monster are selling this idea of stimulation. And so they, align themselves with kind of the action sports community to kind of really, create the association with having an energy drink and getting stimulated, and create effectively a media company for the action sports community that helped them drive the awareness of the category itself. Gatorade is focused on like sports recovery and fitness. And so they focused on aligning themselves with, professional athletics. We're really focused on, I'd say, like creativity. Like we're building Red Bull for creatives, simply put. But like, we use creativity. I think, we're all aspiring to be creative fundamentally. When people talk about productivity and focus, for example, that's really to be creative. It's not just like focus for focus's sake, right? You want to, do something and create something. And, what Recess is really about is, the big idea of Recess is the idea of recess itself, which is like taking a moment throughout your day to reset and rebalance so you can, be your best self, right? And so that might be during the day while you're working to focus. That might be in the evening, instead of a glass of wine or a beer to take the edge off. That might be right before bed. But it's all about, taking that moment. And, that I think makes sense, right? Like, I thought the idea, I like this idea is like, I didn't know much about the future other than that it was going to be crazy, right? Like that's pretty much the only thing I was certain of, going back a few years ago. And so I didn't really anticipate, how accurate an antidote to modern times as a tagline would become.
Yeah.
But here we are. But like, I did feel that like CBD and other functional ingredients that help you relax are going to grow in popularity as
100%.
The world gets crazier, and pretty sure there's going to be an opportunity here. It was like not much more complicated than that.
Totally. I mean, this is a little anecdotal, but I think I told you this. I stopped drinking coffee completely a few months ago, and it was definitely, I ran a marathon without training. This was definitely harder than that. Yeah. And I have since replaced coffee with Recess every morning at 8 a.m. like clockwork. My husband actually will put it next to our nightstand to wake up to. Anyway, so on that note, I know we've also spoken about this a lot, but I'd love to get your thoughts on the idea of what do you think is more valuable, a really strong brand or a really strong product?
I mean, you need both, right? Like, if a product doesn't taste good, people are not going to buy it more than once, right? They'll try it once and they won't buy it again, right? And if it's not effective, right, it's also, people are not going to buy it. And so I think, having a product that tastes good, is efficacious, that is, made with real ingredients, that's low in sugar, all these things, which Recess is all of them, is frankly table stakes now, right? And I think in order to build something that, truly breaks through and can get to scale, I think you need to be bigger than that. And like in the past, a brand was just a name on a package that sat on a shelf and didn't have to stand for anything or represent anything or say anything. It was just like Pepsi on a shelf, and that was an alternative to Coca-Cola, and that was it, right? It didn't really have to do anything. But what I like to say is that in the past, brands were built on the shelf. Today, they're built on your phone. And that fundamentally changes everything. And I still think that's incredibly underappreciated, that, how a brand translates into a digital environment is fundamentally different. And like a social media strategy, as an example, is not posting different angles of your can every day, or even 50 facts about hemp like every month, right? Like, I don't think that's what consumers are connected to. They want to understand, how your product and your brand makes them feel like. And I think that drove so much of our strategy was that, again, I didn't know anything about the consumer packaged good industry, but I looked at these brands and I'm like, what is the common thing amongst them? Is like, they're all marketing a feeling. Red Bull gives you wings, not caffeine, right? They're all, focused on a community, right? Action sports, professional athletics, etc. Right? They're all about, creating this lifestyle, like Corona sitting on a beach, Grey Goose at a club, right? And it's like pretty clear that that is what the business is about. And I think it's just super underappreciated. And, I think it's one of the challenges, right? There's, I don't know, how many CBD oil companies are there? 5,000 of them. And there's no difference amongst them. There are a lot of them. And so, I just think it's, I was always like, what are the lessons like we can take from Red Bull and Monster and Gatorade and Coca-Cola and apply to Recess, even though the company is based in my apartment and there's one other employee, right? And that was
I remember those days.
Yeah. And so like, it was thinking like a bigger brand than we were, right? And that drove our content strategy, that drove this narrative, right? That I think is ultimately, what we're playing for is something very big. And I think it's a prerequisite to get there. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess on that point, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I'm obsessed with your apparel line. My husband wears the 4 Reset shirts he has basically on repeat. True story. So I'd love to hear, I guess, more of your strategy for reality wear. And did you think that was part of the brand when you first launched it a few years ago?
Kind of. I mean, yes. Like in some ways, like that, the whole strategy was to build this world of Recess around the beverage, right? And that the idea of like, again, looking at Red Bull and these other bigger brands to get inspiration for how they're structured. And, if you kind of, so, and then I think a core insight was like to connect with creatives, like create ourselves. Like we want to focus on kind of creatives broadly over time. Right now, I would say we're almost just like speaking to like designers and creative directors. Like we haven't even gone into music or gone into fashion or gone into art or gone into true internet culture. We haven't used any lifestyle photography. We haven't used any talent, right? And so it's really about, our strategy has been about like the act of creating itself, right? So that was, to start one Instagram post a day, which I describe as like a social commentary on the millennial existence. Like that's how I think about our brand voice, right? And that kind of took on a life of its own where the characters like became personalities, and it's like,
it's so fun
we're
to
using
watch.
Recess as to like comment on all of the things we're all going through at this time, right? We created Recess IRL, right? Which was our first pop-up retail experience, in New York. And that was like, all right, let's create a space that felt like you were walking into our Instagram, or the feeling we want you to feel when you drink a Recess. And then, we also hosted like 4 events a week, like for like 6 months with different creative partners in New York. And so it was all about like kind of establishing ourselves as bigger than the beverage, right? Yep. And integrating into kind of a creative community originally in New York and, online. And now, we're in a number of markets around the country. I think there's a little bit of Recess that I call the like all have what they're having effect, right? Where like who are these weird
trend setting?
Well, it's like, who are these weird people that come up with this stuff every day, right? And I think that's what people feel, right? And I think there's something underappreciated in cannabis is that stress and anxiety, which is what people use cannabis to solve, typically, is a story we tell ourselves in our own head. In addition to the efficacy of like the functional ingredients and how they interact with us each individually, like your expectation about what that brand is going to do and your connection to it is of equal importance.
Yep.
And I think, why are people like, kind of obsessed with Recess? And there's a lot of people that are, and I don't think it's about CBD, right? Like, I think I don't think, it's similar to how I don't think what people are that are deeply connected to Red Bull or Starbucks. Like you can get caffeine anywhere. You could take caffeine capsules if you wanted, right? But it's really about the experience that these brands provide.
So on that note, I guess to bring it back to the Recess product itself, I personally, again, I'm wildly biased, but I found all three flavors to be, the launch flavors, to be unique, and I found them to be very perfect for the brand, especially as they've come to life. That's been awesome to watch. Now, I guess that you have some of your new flavors. My favorite is coconut lime. Where does your flavor inspiration come from?
Yeah. Well, like when I working on the initial formulation, like I had, some initial constraints, right? I was like, I knew I wanted to be a sparkling water in a can. I knew I wanted to be, low in sugar and calories. So the first version was, they're all each less than 5 grams of sugar and less than 30 calories. And we've even reduced them further. It's a premium price point because of the functional ingredients. And so we wanted the flavor profile to feel premium, right? So not like LaCroix plus CBD, right? Which is what, frankly, most of the other brands are. It's just like natural flavors, CBD isolate in a can.
Yep.
Like, great.
I see all of them too.
Yeah. And it's like, we wanted to create something new. Like Red Bull, like what is Red Bull? Like Red Bull is its own formula that didn't really exist before. And so I wanted to kind of set out to kind of create like a formulation strategy that was like differentiated, that could justify a premium price point, that used kind of real fruit and had interesting ingredients, right? And so we kind of developed this process just through like hacking and experimentation. That was like it's like kind of we use a tea, it's like kind of a proprietary process, but I think Recess is its own thing. It's certainly not a LaCroix or a Spindrift, right? It's pretty different. It's more like a tea, or maybe it has some kombucha elements to it. And so it was like kind of through trial and error, because we had to figure out how to infuse these functional ingredients in there as well. And so all of that kind of came to this like pretty unique, I'd say, formulation approach. And, I wanted to kind of develop our own flavors, not just do what, every seltzer brand on the market had done. Like everything about Recess is like done in I think a unique way by choice and deliberately. Yep. And so, yeah.
Awesome. So I guess I want to get, as we're running out of time, I kind of want to get to the regulation part of CBD in general. As a leading founder in the space, you've been invited to participate in some incredible political discussions. What should we be asking our political leaders to be doing about CBD and hemp at this time?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess taking a step back, it's like kind of this pretty fascinating, very unique situation. So the way to think about it is like hemp and marijuana are effectively cousins within the broader cannabis family, with the main differentiator being that marijuana is like high in THC, hemp is very low in THC, high in CBD. But as a result of like, the war on drugs over, the 20th century, they became classified as the same thing, even though, again, like Thomas Jefferson used to grow hemp, and there's many kind of uses of it. And the first state to implement, a hemp cultivation pilot program I think it was starting like 10 years ago or something, was Kentucky, which was Mitch McConnell's state. And basically he saw the opportunity for farmers that used to grow corn, soybeans, tobacco, et cetera, that transitioned to hemp, and it became just a much easier to grow and higher yielding crop. And so basically when I came up with the idea for Recess, I'm like, I'm not going to start a business selling a controlled substance. Like that's not that interesting to me. Like I want to go after a big market. So there had to be a light at the end of the tunnel for CBD. And I'm like, all right, if Mitch McConnell wants this to happen, like at least on the farming side, those farmers are ultimately going to want to sell to like Coca-Cola and hopefully Recess. Like it's going to work itself out, right? And that was the bet, right? I like made a big bet, and that was like a year before the Hemp Farming Act passed. So,
yep.
But I was like, if that's right, like this is underappreciated, like what that would mean. But at the same time, it was also people thought it would do more than it did, right? It really just legalized the cultivation of hemp and shifted the regulation from the DEA to the FDA. And now the FDA has to determine how CBD can be used in various categories of products, from supplements to food and beverages to topicals, right? And so very early on, I've recognized that the main constraint in Recess is actually the regulation of CBD, and that the only reason Recess isn't sold in Whole Foods and Target and, national retailers is because of that. And so I just committed to all right, better get pretty engaged on the regulatory and figure out how to help solve this. Right. And so join the main hemp industry coalition is the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, which represents all of the farmers, the processors and extractors, the CBD oil brands like Lord Jones and Charlotte's Web, et cetera.
People, no, just kidding.
They invited me on the board, and I now serve as the executive vice president of that organization, and we're leading the fight in DC and in each state to get kind of regulatory clarity. And there's this interesting distinction between supplements and food and beverage products, and do the oil companies view Recess as a competitor? If you're drinking a Recess or you're not using CBD oil, how does that change your dynamics on the political front, right? So it's just fascinating situation that's somewhat, it's unprecedented that you've had a compound as popular as this. I mean, this is already an established category, right? Across supplements and beverages that's effectively unregulated because the FDA hasn't released these guidelines. And I think that puts, frankly, consumers at risk because there's a lot of brands out there that don't take quality and compliance as seriously as we do. And others like us. And so I actually think this is a situation where we want to be regulated. We really want to be regulated. And I think regulation is important. And I think I'm confident something's going to happen in the next 12 months. And when that happens, I think, what I like to say is it feels like CBD is everywhere, but it's actually nowhere because it's not in the national retailers yet. Right. And so, I'm sorry, but little natural food stores are tiny, right? In comparison to what will happen when this opens up. And I think it'll be one of the biggest things to happen in the consumer packaged good industry in a long time, right? And that this will have a massive, there's a lot of, companies sitting on the sidelines. All the big beverage companies will get into the space, which I'm excited for, right? I didn't start Recess to not compete against Coca-Cola because I can't sell, right? That wasn't the point. So, it's a fascinating situation. And I've never felt more confident that something will happen in the next 12 months.
That's amazing. I'll ask you one more question and then I'll let you go. How connected do you think hemp policy will be to broader cannabis policy in the future?
It's very connected, and it sometimes hurts hemp because you have kind of many states like New York, for example, that's been exploring kind of legalizing marijuana and just implementing a broad cannabis program. But the issues of hemp that hemp deals with are very different from the issues of marijuana and all the issues that stem from that around licensing and all that. And so sometimes I think they're connected for sure, sometimes in ways that hurt hemp, I'd say. In California, as an example, I mean, the marijuana industry is very influential, and a lot of the marijuana industry views CBD as a bad thing because they're if you can go buy a Recess at Erewhon, you're not going to go to the dispensary to buy a joint, maybe. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it's expanding the pie, and these are going to be interchangeable. So they're very connected, and I think there's many different constituencies within cannabis broadly, and they all have slightly different interests. But it's having it all work together is critical. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. This was amazing. Every time I talk to you, I learned something new.